So today we're going to talk about brisket on your Broil King keg. It's one of those things that's pretty easy to do. There's a lot of time involved. The results are spectacular. Let's get to it. So we have this whole brisket. All the corners here are quite clean, actually. It doesn't hurt to flip it over. Now I'm going to try to keep one hand clean here to work the knife so it doesn't get slippery. There we go. This is the real appealing side of it here. So you can see the grain in the brisket running on about a 45-degree angle across the brisket. That's the brisket flat. So that has really consistent grain to it. Great for slicing, for sandwiches, and it has these really long fibers in it. So if you do shredded brisket, pulled brisket, you get these really long, really tender pieces once it cooks down in the smoker. Other things to look at, especially this area here, this is a hard fat. So I'm going to trim some of that out of there. Now take a few minutes and just trim it up and clear some of this off. Fat cap on the brisket, we've got two spots where there's a nice healthy fat cap. If you just clean that down to white fat, you're in pretty good shape. You don't want to take it all away. In some respects, it protects your brisket from too much heat if your smoker gets hot. But again, it's really hard to season through, and you want a nice consistent layer of seasoning all the way across your brisket for that killer bark. Really good flavor to work with. So I've got that trimmed down, maybe a little bit thin there. You want to leave a little bit of fat on there. Work this back to the silver skin. You can see where they come together there too. So you can trim these as much or as little as you'd like. Don't knock yourself out. It's a pretty inconsistent cut to work with anyway, so you're not going to make it look like a piece of art before you throw it on the smoker. But you know, trim to your heart's content, I guess. So we got a good yellow mustard. This is a deli-style mustard. You can use a grainy Dijon or anything that really suits your fancy. Apple cider vinegar, good local beer to work with as well. So we'll pour all these guys together and we can get right into it. And we'll just spread that on in a good layer. It doesn't hurt to pat the brisket dry with paper towel, which I've done before I started trimming it. Our brisket's ready to go into the fridge for a couple of hours. We've got the mustard slather. You can do this overnight if you'd like as well. Anything you're marinating overnight, get it into a fridge. Now the brisket sat overnight in the fridge. We're going to apply the rub, and here we go. Now this is a rub that I make. A typical chicken and pork barbecue rub may not fit the bill perfectly. For brisket, the flavor profile doesn't necessarily work. This has quite a bit of celery salt, onion salt, cumin as well. So a nice flavor profile, goes well with the mustard slather, goes well with the strong beefy flavor as well. So for the entire brisket, we're going to use about a cup. So we'll wrap it up, we'll throw it in the fridge, and then we'll come back in 12 hours or so. All right, we're finally outside, which is pretty exciting. Beautiful day here. We've made it through 2 days of prep indoors on our brisket. Now we're ready to go. So what I'm going to do, I've got my keg set up. I'm ready to get it lit. I'm going to add my wood chips to it and let the temperature settle in well before the brisket goes on. You want to have your temperature settled in nicely on your keg before you put any meat on there. You want to make sure you're locked in. It's a long cook. If it goes on too hot, you're going to seal it off early. You're not going to pick up all that great smoky barbecue flavor by using it at a high heat. So really important that you get your temperature dialed in exactly where you want it on your keg. In this case, with the brisket, you want to be 225 to 250. I'm pleased to report our quality assurance department has finally showed up for work, so that's a good sign, right? He's ready to go. You can add chips to enhance many flavors. So to actually use wood chips with your keg, pop the keg open, throw a handful of wood chips in there. If you're soaking them, give them about half an hour in the water, and you can do a combination of the two. You can soak some chips, you can have some dry chips, and you're adding them in both at the same time. It gives you a nice layered smoke over a couple of hours of cooking time. So we'll put that on the keg. We'll open the keg, let the smoke settle out of it a little bit. Fits like a glove. So we've got our brisket on the keg, got some time to actually talk about how to cook these things. So let's think about just cooking anything for a long time. If you're cooking something for 8, 10, 12 hours, longer than that, it's not a bad guideline to use an hour per pound. You're not changing the temperature too much, you're just increasing the time that it's cooking for. Your best friend when it comes to actually telling if something's done on the Broil King keg is a good probe thermometer. But guidelines to work with here on brisket, you want to be at least 190 degrees, maybe even as high as 200, 205 degrees. One thing to think about when you're cooking the brisket, and you'll see this if you watch the internal temperature as it comes up while you're cooking. It's called the stall. So what happens when you're cooking is your internal temperature just comes up gradually over time. But you'll get to about 160 degrees Fahrenheit internal temp, and it just stays flat. It plateaus. What's happening where the internal temperature plateaus like that is you're cooking moisture out of the brisket. So as this moisture is leaving, it's like a tipping point for it. The moisture is leaving the brisket and taking with it a lot of heat. If you have your temperature at 225 for a brisket and you try to jack the temperature up to 275, 300 degrees Fahrenheit, the result that you get isn't going to be as good if you wait it out and just let the cooking process take care of it. Once you get to that temperature, 195, 200 degrees, what you want to do, have some foil ready, take your brisket off the smoker, wrap it in foil, throw it in an oven, a cooler, throw some towels over top of it, and old beach towels work well for this. You want it to be clean. You want to keep that heat in the brisket, but you don't want to have a heat source necessarily. You want it to just stay at that temperature. It kind of mellows the whole process. The brisket relaxes nicely, and then you're ready to eat. So we're about 12 hours in. Our brisket is looking good. We're ready to go. So we're going to take the brisket off, get it on our cutting board carefully here. I got a good feeling about this one. Let's wrap this guy up and head back into the kitchen. We'll get it ready to serve. We've let our brisket sit for about an hour, wrapped up. We've unwrapped it, we've got it on the board here. We're gonna carve into it in a second, but before we do that, I'll talk just for a sec about the knife that I have to do it. It's called a slicer. It makes your life quite a bit easier for cutting larger cuts of meat like brisket or roasts and so on. This gives you a nice long blade to work with, and you'll get those really consistent slices that you want with brisket. So here we go, let's see. Now that our brisket's plated, you can pair that up with some traditional barbecue sides, cornbread, baked beans, potato salad, vegetables if you're so inclined.